Creepypasta time. In the apocalypse, I work for a company that exterminates mutated animals. Horses have devious minds. Liam and I lingered outside a place called Cal's Ranch. It had a spooky vibe to it, which could have been attributed in part to the dust storm blowing in, coupled with the abandoned feel of the location. To be frank, I was still reeling from the encounter with the alligators roughly a week earlier. Rubbing my face out of a sense of weariness, I scanned the surroundings as best I could. I didn't see many ranch hands milling about. Only a strangely inhuman shape leaning against the rickety-looking fence that kept the horses in. "What's that?" I asked. "Can you see? Your eyes are a bit better than mine." I turned to face Liam. Liam wasn't really registering what I was saying. I could tell. "Hey, you could be nicer to me, considering you're the only reason we took this contract," I went on. In fact, I was a little irritated. This contract didn't pay nearly as well as the others, but between Liam's and Jeremiah's insistence, I backed down and accepted it. Liam seemed to shake himself out of whatever reverie he had fallen into. "Dunno. It looks creepy though," Liam replied. I wasn't able to see very far because of the mild sandstorm, and honestly the eerie shape gave me the shivers. "Rio, my horse, whinnied." "Easy," I said. I petted Rio, but he shook me off. He seemed especially agitated in this place. Eventually, I swallowed my fear and stroked Rio's mane so that he'd gallop closer. As we did, Liam followed suit, and after a couple feet I squinted again. "Is that a horse leaning against the fence, its head leaning against one of its hooves?" I asked, tone incredulous. "I guess. Be on your guard, Miles. I've read what happens to horses when they mutate," Liam lectured. "And, for some reason, it affects their brains more than anything. They sort of turn into tricksters." Rio brought me closer to the fence, and this time I could see the horse clearly. It was posing exactly like I thought it was, leaning against the fence, head supported by a hoof. As if it thought it was being humorous. Then the thing smiled, and I had to stifle a scream. It had a silver horseshoe in its mouth, and the way its lips curled around the object looked so bizarre and unnatural. I pulled on Rio's reins to get him to halt in its tracks. He let out a rebellious whinny and backed up. I pulled out my gun. "Now, don't shoot," came the voice of an elderly man. "I know something doesn't look right, but I can explain." The man motioned us over, well to the left of the fence. Liam grimaced. He appeared impatient, wanting to get this over with. I just stared down at the old man, who hastily introduced himself and told us not to be too hasty in our aggression. "Yes, the horses here were acting strangely," he said, "but that there was a reason for it. It's why he hired Jeremiah's company to send us out. Sometimes another mutated animal is nearby, and it's their influence that taints the horses," Cal said, motioning to the only horse in the pen. It smiled at us with the horseshoe in its mouth, which glinted off the setting sun, and it appeared to wink at us. Rio shook his neck back and forth, going backward a few steps. He didn't like the thing, that much was obvious. I couldn't blame him. "I'd hate to put old Silver down. He's been a stalwart," Cal said in a sad voice. Yet his face didn't appear sad. Maybe the old codger was in shock over what was happening. "Cal told us to explore the ranch if we liked, since maybe that would lead us to the source which was tainting the horse's mind." "Something doesn't add up," I began, once Cal had gone back inside his small wooden house. Liam nodded, but didn't say anything. Cal's explanation would imply that Rio would be acting significantly odd. While he's a little spooked, he's not leaning against the fence like some creepy demon playing mind games, I finished. "Yeah. Plus, I've never heard of his way of explaining this phenomenon. The horses' minds aren't tainted by other animals. Once they're exposed to whatever sickness the rest of the animals have, then their minds are warped for good. There's no hope for old Silver." "I'll take your word for it, and this place gives me the creeps. Why did we have to come out in the middle of a fucking sandstorm?" I said, and gently guided Rio off to the side so I could wipe my eyes. "That's gonna be the death of us, not some demented horse." It was Liam's idea to go check up on California if we couldn't trust him. We certainly couldn't trust whatever he was up to. The inside of the shack was dilapidated and stunk of something. Only a few lanterns placed in bubbles of darkness offered any light. There were 4 rooms total. A living room, a kitchen, a small room for a stained cot, and a bathroom. We found the source of the smell. I heard rustling coming from one of the slices of darkness, and turned around, gun at the ready. Cal leapt out, axe in two withered hands. Without thinking, I shot him in the chest, and he flew back against the wall, blood leaking out of his mouth. I thought I saw Silver standing in the doorway, like a person would, and as that unsettling smile spread, I pulled the trigger out of fear. Liam yelled at me for some reason, to stop, and I didn't understand why until I went over to the twitching body. Rio. I shot him instead of who I thought he was. I wept, and Liam, bless him, didn't say much but put a hand on my back. As much as I wanted to grieve for longer, I couldn't. Not with that thing on the loose. We found Silver inside the rickety wooden fence, the sandstorm having died down a little. It smiled again, eyes black abysses with nothing in them but blind maliciousness. I found I couldn't pull the trigger facing Silver. It just continued to grin like a thing of pure evil, but my hands were frozen in place. Liam seemed to be struggling to move of his own accord as well. Silver held us there for several minutes, and I was only able to stand in place, terrified of what it might do. Then it galloped off into the storm, its laughter lingering in the dust-choked space inside the fence. Liam and I were in a daze for close to an hour, and afterward we just set the whole place on fire, unable to move Rio's corpse. I thought it a symbolic way to dispose of the body. During the long trek back to Jeremiah's outpost, we took turns riding on the remaining horse. We were lucky enough to have packed just enough water to make the journey. I'm not sure what happened back there, Liam began, but it seemed too easy for Silver to just gallop off into the sunset like that. Later, Liam took me aside and said he had a confession to make. Guess after what happened to Rio, I should be up front with you, he said. Jeremiah said there'd be something extra in it for me if we completed this contract. While it seemed like a lower payment to you, well, I'd be getting the likely location of the beast who killed my father and got away with it. The mutated cows preferred the darkness and cold, often holing up in caves if the opportunity arose. According to Liam, Jeremiah claimed a group of them resided in one such cave. We could go in and slaughter them, hopefully killing the creature who killed Rick, Liam's father. But as I went to the stables later, to check on Liam's horse as a sort of substitute for Rio, I realized we had another problem. I tried to comb its mane, and it gave me the depraved smile Silver had. It chuckled sadistically. I devoured the soul of your horse, Rio, it said. Its terribly dark eyes seemed to be controlling my limbs so I couldn't move. Do not tell Liam of this, or he'll kill me outright, and then what's left of your horse will disappear forever. Its laugh made my skin crawl, but I realized it was right. For Rio's sake, I wouldn't say anything. Even if it meant the death of Liam. I wasn't sure how the essence of Silver managed to travel from body to body, though the mere fact it could explained why it was there in the stables, staring at me with eyes that had been tinged with color of volcanic ash. Silver bared his teeth, which were in fine form for a demonic mutated entity. When Liam came by later to check on his horse, the horrible features had disappeared, leaving the normal, docile creature to be fawned over. The only thing I could think of was the other side of the portal. Suddenly, my secondary life had taken on too many complications. A horse that might attack either Liam or I at any given moment, but whose soul was in part Rio. Then there was Liam, who seemed intent on running blind into a cave with those demented cows, things seeming to be unfettered nightmares given flesh. It seemed a bad omen that I encountered one on my way back to the portal, beady eyes a glowing predatory white, jaw nearly detached and hungry for the devouring of a human. The road from the outpost to the portal wasn't a long one, but it was rife with opportunities for demonic/mutant encounters. I barely made it through the portal in one piece, and that night I had nightmare after nightmare of the cow who killed Rick, Liam's father.